Welcome to MEMO's conversation with Dr. Salman Abu Sitta to discuss his new atlas. Dr. Salman is, as many of our viewers will know, is a renowned Palestinian cartographer. He has mapped out historic Palestine and developed a practical plan for implementing the right of return of Palestinian refugees. His latest work, which was published earlier this year, is the Atlas of Palestine 1871 to 1877, with the subheading, "This is Arab Palestine before the Zionist colonization." Dr. Salman, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much, Naseem, for inviting me.
Thank you. Before we discuss your new atlas in detail, can you tell us a bit about your groundbreaking work to which you have dedicated a significant part of your life mapping out historic Palestine? Why did you undertake such a mammoth project?
Well, in 1961, I had my second encounter with Great Britain. The first one, of course, in Palestine, British mandated Palestine, where I was born. And in 1961, I went to London to do my PhD at University College London. And that was my first experience of facing the British right in their home. We, as foreigners, were given something called an alien card, where you register your residence. So one time I went to renew my alien's card, and I took it back. They gave it to me by an official. And then I looked at it twice. Against the citizenship, it says uncertain. I went back to the official and asked him, "What do you mean uncertain? I am Palestinian. Of all people, you British know what Palestine is." And he was about 45 or something, so he could have been in Palestine himself. And he was kind and said, "Son, this is only a formality." So this struck me a thunderbolt. Here I am in England. I'm called uncertain, of uncertain citizenship. So I tried to find out more about Palestine being uncertain. I went to Royal Geographical Society of one place. I've been to many other places. And I asked them for a map of Palestine. Said, "No, there is no map of Palestine. There is no Palestine." I said, "Are you sure? Show me the atlas." I looked at the atlas and said, and pointed my finger right, "This is Palestine." And the man said, oh, you mean Israel." And then I found out that all the maps about Palestine in the Royal Geographical Society were renamed Israel. By who? By the British, who entered Palestine in 1917 to liberate it from the Ottomans and give it back to its people. So that was a shocking experience for me. And then I started collecting documents here and there. You come to the conclusion that the colonial powers anywhere in the world are the ones who keep records of the colonized countries. We don't necessarily keep records of our country very much. I mean, we know where Jerusalem is, where Jaffa and Haifa is. So we really, of course, we study geography, but the records about our country, about our people, are done always by colonial powers at different stages. And then from then on, I scoured the archives of the British Archives. It was called Public Records Office then, and universities, Oxford, Cambridge, and Colonial Office and Commonwealth Office and so on. And from then on, I went on to other countries like Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris and the War Museum, Museum in Munich in Germany, and in other places. Of course, I went to the United Nations and examined many documents in its library and the Library of Congress, and it took some years. And why it took some years? It could have taken much shorter time because I was an individual. I am not a citizen of a country where I can tell my government to call the government concerned, give me the documents you have about my country. I couldn't do that. So I have to do it on an individual basis, making friends of librarians, taking them to lunch, and having, cooperation from some and not so much cooperation from others. And that is what took me so much. But in the end, the Atlas of Palestine, 1917 to 1966, is, I think, a document worthwhile because it has 55,000 names. And this is the country where the West and the Zionists say it's a land without people. And those people who did not exist in their minds have created and carved 50,000 names of places, cities, monuments, maqams, and holy places.
We will get to that, actually. I think the Atlas of Palestine, the one you mentioned from 1917 to 1966, is one of your many works. And before that, you recreated a map of Palestine prior to the Zionist colonization. The Atlas of Palestine, 1917 to 66, was your second atlas, and as you mentioned, it has it's an A3 atlas with nearly 1,000 pages. It's an amazing book. But your latest book, the latest volume, which is the Atlas of Palestine, 1871 to 1877, showing villages during the late Ottoman period. What is different about this volume? What are the new materials that can be found that wasn't included in your two previous volumes?
At that time, I produced 3 atlases. One of them, Palestine 1948, which is only about the depopulated villages. And the second one is the one you just mentioned, Atlas Palestine 1917 to 1966, which really explains the situation at Palestine, Mandate Palestine. And then I produced the Return Journey Atlas, which shows the depopulated Palestinian villages with all the historical monuments remaining, feature points, they call them. But on top of that, I superimposed the present Israeli roads and settlements. So this is to show any Palestinian, here is your village, here is the land of your village, and let us see which kibbutz, which settlers actually settle in your land. And this has been very important for my subsequent work on the right of return. Now, about the new atlas, which is now in print now, for at least 20 years, I discovered Palestine Expression Fund, which has been established in 1865 in London, and I became a member of it, and found that they have made a survey of Palestine in 1871 to 1877. Then they went to London and they collected the material, printed it in the middle of 1980s. Now, the interesting thing about this, the British were very late comers to Palestine. This is a bit surprising, yes, because the first comers to the Middle East after an absence of 700 years after the Crusaders were the French. Napoleon campaign to occupy Egypt and part of Palestine in 1798. And the British, the French, Napoleon brought with him 76 scientists, and they produced 18 volumes about Egyptian life and so on, and some maps. The British were absent from that. Then, in the middle of the 19th century, the Germans started actually taking interest in the Holy Land, and they made fairly good maps of Palestine. What made the British then go to Palestine, to Holy Land? Well, there are, in my guess, that is, 2 reasons. One of them is that they were jealous of the French who did that, and they were worried about the road from England to India, So they wanted to know about the middle station of that road. That's one thing. The other is under the pretext of the study of the Holy Land, they wanted to make maps of the Middle East under this pretext. But actually, what triggered this off is in 1869, the Suez Canal was opened, and the French were actually the originator of this project. And so they were very jealous, and they sent, in fact, a mission, PF mission, Palestine Exploration Fund mission, to Sinai in 1865 to inquire about the Suez Canal and try to gain the support of Sinai sheikhs that, you remember that in 1882, the British invaded Egypt, and they were afraid that Arabs in Sinai would attack them. So they wanted to inquire about that. Then, under the guise of studying the geography of the Bible, they started this PF mission in 1871. They produced...
Wasn't one of the reasons military reasons to chart Palestine? Isn't that one of the things you mentioned in your atlas, that one of the reasons which motivated PEF to chart Palestine in the way they did, coming after the Germans and the French, was military? Is that one of the reasons?
This is the real reason, because PEF had no resources, they had no surveyors. So the British Army provided surveyors who did the work. They were British Army officers. And halfway, or even early on, they have no funds to continue. So the War Office actually paid them to continue the work. They paid for the printing, but they did not want them to publish it before they agree, because there was a war between Syria, Russia and Turkey. Yeah. So, and under this guise, was very convenient under the Ottoman Empire that these people are looking for archaeology and looking for Holy Land studies. So they continued until 1914, just before the beginning of First World War. And a man called Newcomb made maps which made it easy for Allenby to conquer Palestine. In fact, this man, Newcomb, turned up 10 years later, 1923, charting the borders of Palestine with Lebanon and Syria. So it was a military espionage project par excellence. The spirit behind that, of course, is what really attracted me to talk about it. There are the things we have done in the Atlas are, I would say, considerable. For one thing, we noticed the crusader spirit of the surveyors. They would not take any notice of any Arab or Muslim monument. I
think we'll get to the erasure of Palestinian history and culture in a bit, but I think, can you speak a little bit about the kind of errors that you were able to correct in your version of the Atlas? That's one of the triumphs of your Atlas, which is that it corrects the errors of previous surveys, such as the PEF, which, as you mentioned, is a British initiative. So what are the kind of errors that you were able to correct in your Atlas?
There are two kinds of comments, which I call errors. One of them, the only thing I can say is to describe them, and the other is actually about facts which we can correct. So let me start with the second one, which is easy. For example, we found that there are many wrong spellings from of the names, both in Arabic and English. We corrected that. We also found a huge error in accuracy of the maps. The villages are dislocated by up to half a kilometer on the east side and lesser so in the north. But you don't blame them, because there was no satellites at the time and so on. So now with the new technology, we shifted the location of the villages in the maps and so on. We corrected the maps for accuracy purposes. So you can now rely on them as compared with modern maps. Also, we found something strange. When I looked at the records at the PF here, I found there are 265 maps brought from Palestine to London, but not fully used. Well, I don't blame them because they made them into only 26 maps, so they have to drop something. Now with our technology, we don't have to drop anything. So I use the information brought from Palestine to London, but not used in the printed version. I found 4,000 names not mentioned. Our atlas now speaks of 13,000 names instead of 9. And also, we found names of places which have been neglected. So we added that. That is what you might call correcting of facts. But the sentiment behind the work is really what irritated me. The spirit of crusaders was very dominant. In fact, the image of a crusader soldier with his sword decorates the first page of the memoirs. So it seemed to me, as a Palestinian, they wanted to come back after 700 years to conquer Palestine. But it's not only that. There are many things when they find a very old stone with 1 or 2 Hebrew letters, they spend weeks and pages to draw it and to describe it and so on. But they neglected to give names to 400 or 500 shrines, what we call maqams of holy places. They just call them tombs or ruins. In our modern atlas, we gave them names, and they had names even then, because people actually keep their names for centuries. So they neglected that. And then the major omission they have, although it was in their term of reference, they speak about, as I said, stones to do with Hebrew invented history or crusaders, but they neglected to mention anything about Palestinian people. I mean, they were walking around about 2,000 villages and hamlets, and how come you don't speak about them? They spoke about the dead objects, but they neglected to speak about people who are alive with them. I sarcastically say that they only mentioned 20 living objects, 10 of their servants and 10 of the animals they were carrying their luggage. That's the only living creatures they describe in the book. Okay. And then there is a case of a man who helped them a great deal, an Arab geographer. His name is Nu'man Qasatli. He actually listed all Arabic names, and they referred to him as an Arab scribe, like someone who just scribed things. But in fact, he was an accomplished geographer. He published 2 or 3 books about Palestine and Syria, and what he got from the Victorian officers is a mention of an Arab scribe.
So speaking about the erasure of Palestine, by way of contrast, I'm wondering whether you can compare it to Israel's erasure of Palestinians. PEF's erasure, of course, of Palestinian heritage, I'm assuming is nowhere near the level that followed the Zionist takeover of Palestine. One of the things that struck me looking at your previous atlas is just how all previous empires, whether it be the Ottomans, Christian Crusaders, Muslim Abbasids, or Byzantine Christian, who all ruled over Palestine for a 2,000-year period. I mean, we never saw anything that comes near the level of historical and cultural erasure in the 7 decades following the creation of the State of Israel. A good example in your atlas is the Bishop of Eusebius of Caesarea. Why is this Christian bishop such an important figure in Palestinian cartography?
You know, one could describe Zionism in many ways, but one of them, to me, is they are the biggest impostors in history. Impostors. They actually create a fanciful virtual world in which they place themselves. They come from ghettos of Poland and Russia, and they try to create a false history in Palestine. In the past, they try to create it, and in the present day, there is no colonial project which has attempted this unusual leap in attack of the fact and the truth. The British in India did not do it. The French in Algeria did not do it. And I listed in my atlas 10 kinds of wars the Zionists have waged against us. One of them is erasing history and erasing also geography and defamation of people who fight and doing archaeology, which has nothing to do with reality. Anyway, so Nassim, this really brought me to the conclusion, among all people in the world, we have to prove that we existed. Not only that, we existed longer with a record than I keep saying that, than London is English. London is English only for 900 years, but Palestine is Palestinian for 2,000 years or more. So this brought me to a new project, actually it's culmination of the previous work, which I'm glad to tell you about it now. We have now, in about a month or two, we'll have online a project called Palestine Through the Ages. We will trace every village by maps and by description from the year 2006, which is the return journey, to 1945, which is the British mandate. And then we have, of course, the new Atlas 1871. We take the name of each village with a map and say where it was, where it wasn't during the mandate, and where it wasn't in 1871. Then we found a valuable document about Palestine in the year 1596, which is the Ottoman tax register. At that time, the Ottomans listed all villages by name, how many people they live, what they produce, and so on, how much tax they pay. So that we created a map of that. And then we have the record of the Palestinian bishop Eusebius in Caesarea in the year 313. He produced work first in Greek, then translated into Latin, and recently into English, listing all the localities in Palestine in the year 313. Why he did that? He wanted to help the pilgrims going to Jerusalem. So we created a map out of that. And now when you click on a village in a map in our new database, you get to know how it looks now, how it was during the British mandate, how it was in 1877, how it was in 1596, and how it was 313. I don't know of any country in Europe, at least because it was not in existence in the first millennium, who can trace the names and the location of their villages with the same name over 2,000 years. We are really not only proud of that, but I'm very sorry indeed, sad, that we have to tell the Western world, which sends satellites to the moon, that we existed for 2,000 years, but we do.
It's extraordinary. I mean, anyone that meets you will clearly be struck by how intimately connected you are to the land of Palestine. This is powerfully illustrated in your mapping of Britain's march to take over Gaza. Gaza was under British onslaught before the Israeli occupation of Palestine. So the British onslaught on Gaza began on land that belonged to your parents, which struck me. I mean, tell us about that.
That's right. That's right. When I dug into the British archives, I found the maps used by Allenby to conquer Palestine. The British army arrived in Palestine at the beginning of 1917, and in the spring of 1917, they were defeated twice to conquer Gaza. And so they removed the general commanding officer and they brought Allenby instead. Allenby pretended to attack Gaza third time, but in fact they made a detour by night to attack Be'er Sheva, which is to the east. Their starting point was in my land, Ma'in Abu Sitta. And actually the map says Abu Sitta. So they marched at night in the Wadi and they surprised Be'er Sheva Turkish garrison next morning. My mother saw that and my father didn't because he was on the side of Turks. And so he went with some leaders of Palestine to get arms and support to fight the incoming British army. What happened is that this surprise worked very well, and the British army took Be'er Sheva at 6:30 on a Wednesday, 31st of October, 1917. Of course, in the morning, the Allenby sent a telegram to London saying, we took Be'er Sheva. It was the first British victory for them, not only in Palestine, but in Iraq and Turkey. They were defeated many times. So they said, we took Be'er Sheva. Jerusalem will be a Christmas present.
Yeah.
Next day, 2nd of November, 1917, Balfour issued his infamous declaration. So the sad thing is that where we expected that we will recover and will have our own freedom and independence, the British treachery, not only at that time, but still continues until today. That is why the work of PSC and the work of Middle East Monitor and are very important to show that this crime committed 100 years ago is still active and still mentioned by British politicians with pride, like Theresa May said, with pride.
That's right. Turning our focus to the present, looking at events unfolding currently, thinking of the normalization of relation between Israel and the UAE. I mean, how optimistic are you that the right of return, for which you've been one of the strongest advocates, spending decades charting maps showing how this could be practically feasible? I mean, how optimistic are you that this will be factored into any future peace deal, if there is a peace deal? This will be our last question.
The UAE alliance, late alliance with Israel, is a new public event, but it is not really new. In the sense, if we look back at the last 72 years, Arab rulers paid lip service to Palestine, but they did nothing, either because they couldn't or they wouldn't do anything like that. So I am not very concerned about that, because the powerhouse of our case is the people of Palestine. There are now 13 million, and they will be in 2030, 18 million. Half of them are still on the soil of Palestine. Unlike what Ben Gurion predicted, the young did not forget. In fact, I am proud and happy that I'm dealing with tens of young Palestinian groups all over the world who are as determined, even better than their grandparents, because they are more qualified and more confident, to the liberation, that's what they say, liberation, and the right of return. My studies about right of return have two purposes. One is for me as a Palestinian. We want to know how it will be carried out. We know we have the right, but actually, do we have the logistics? Do we have the data? Do we know where we could go and what can we do when the time comes? So we have now a huge database about millions of Palestinian refugees. We know where they come from. We know what their land is. We know where they are today. And we know also even the route they should take to return home. By the way, in Gaza, 2 million people, they come from 247 Palestinian villages which have been depopulated through massacres by Israel in 1948. Their density of population are 7,000 persons per square kilometer. The people, settlers who took their land, their density is only 7 persons per square kilometers. So we created that map. We actually know what kind of settlers are. And we found the surprising results. I'm sure you must have heard me, Nassim, talk about it before, that 88% of Israeli Jews live in 12% of area of so-called Israel because they did not move out except in a fairly slightly large area. The refugee land is controlled by 2 parties, the Israeli army and the kibbutz, which are planted for one purpose only, to prevent the return of the refugees. Now, this is one aspect of my work, to tell our people that we have the legal right, we have logistic possibility, and we have the plan to do it. But this is not the only purpose. A lot of people in Europe, as you well know, and sometimes in the United States, they say, no, we know it's a Nakba is a terrible thing, but what are you going to do if you go back? You are going to create a Jewish Nakba? Now, I think this question is immoral and racist. People come to your family, kill half of them, take their house, and bring their friends in your house, and you say, I want my house. You say, oh, but these poor people living in your house, what are they going to do? Well, I say that they have 2 options. One is to go back to where they come from, or to live as decent, peaceful citizens, just like the Jews who live in Golders Green in London. They didn't kill the British people, their neighbors.
So you're basically advocating a one-state solution for liberal democracy, one-state solution for the Palestinians.
Not really, Nassim.
Okay.
I really avoid talking about states.
Okay.
Because I'll tell you why. Because state formation and state recognition is a political act. It is not necessarily part of human rights. But right of return is basically entrenched, enshrined in international law. So I say simply, I would go back to my land and home, and I live in it. If somebody would like to live next door to me, not at my expense, then the people of the country decide what kind of government they want to live in. And I'm not going to be bogged into this kind of government or that kind of government. Actually, the so-called liberal Zionists always push that. Why? Because they want us to be busy with the kind of political system they expect. If they don't like it, they drop my right of return. If they like it, they accept my right of return. I refuse that.
Yeah. So you're basically an organic political structure which caters to the rights of every single citizen within historic Palestine. Yes.
As I say in simple words, and you are fully aware of what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Let the Jews in Palestine be like the Jews in London.
Yeah. It's been a wonderful discussion. Unfortunately, we are out of time. I want to thank Dr. Salman Abu Sitta for joining us. And I want to thank you at home for joining us as well. See you next time in another MEMO conversation. Very good evening. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much, Nassim. You are always very good support. Thank you.